Hello, students. The topic for today's discussion is land reform. Till now, we have been studying the agricultural sector, and under the agricultural sector comes land reform. We obviously know that India is an agricultural country, and for better productivity of agriculture, land has to be reformed. In simple English, we know that reform means change. Basically, it means change for good, for betterment. So, land reform was introduced in India for better productivity of agriculture. Now, let us see what land reform is. Land reform means a change in the way in which agricultural land is held or owned. Changes in the laws, regulations, or customs regarding land ownership. Land was the most fundamental problem of the Indian agriculture and also of the entire country. Thus, land reform is a reform of the agricultural sector. For better performance of agriculture, it was necessary to reform land. Land reform was introduced to bring a positive change in the productivity of agriculture. It was under the leadership of the first Prime Minister of India that land reform was introduced in India. Land reform held a special place in the 5-year plans. And we obviously know that the first 5-year plan concentrated on the agricultural sector. So, naturally, land reform was also given emphasis in this plan period, that is, in the first plan period. Land reform provided for the elimination of intermediary rights, tenancy reforms, including regulation on rent, security of tenure, etc. Land reform was a necessity for the number one, economical, and number two, social progress of India and its people. When we think of land, two classes of people emerge. Number one, the owners, and number two, the renters. So now let us see the important features of land reform in India. Number one, abolition of intermediaries. Zamindars, Tolakdars, Jagirdars are the intermediaries. During the British time, the tillers or the farmers of the land were not the actual owners. The ownership of the land was with these intermediaries. The intermediaries were only concerned in collecting rent. The government realized after independence that in order to increase output, the tillers should be made the owners of land. Because once you have ownership, you have more responsibility towards that land, and you will do anything to bring in more productivity from the land, thus abolishing the intermediaries. This brought around 20 million tenants in direct contact with the state. The abolition even made forest land and wasteland better managed by the state. So here we can see the interest of the zamindars were different from that of the peasants. Zamindars wanted profit and peasants wanted more productivity. So there was conflict in the interest of zamindars and peasants. So if the intermediaries were abolished, maybe these problems would not be prevalent in the country. The second feature is tenancy reform or tenancy regulation. There were provisions made for the security of tenure and also for the regulations of rent. The tenancy reform brought the tenants in direct contact with the state. In many areas, ownership of lands were given to their tenants. Around 3 million tenants and sharecroppers benefited because of this. The third feature of land reform is ceiling on land holdings. Now, here, what do you mean by ceiling? Ceiling means the maximum, right? So, naturally, ceiling on land holdings meant the maximum amount of land that was held by an individual. So, if a person had excess land, then that land or that excess or the surplus land would be taken away by the government. Around 2.3 million acres of surplus land were taken away by the government, and these surplus lands were given to the landless, agriculturalist, tenants, etc. So those people who did not have land were given these excess or surplus lands. The fourth point is consolidation of holdings. Now here, the fourth point, that is consolidation of holdings, and the third point, and that is ceiling on land holdings, can sometimes be conflicting, because in the third point we said that too much land is not good, so therefore the excess is taken away. But in the fourth point we are saying that small pieces of land or fragmented land is also not good, and therefore they have to be consolidated, that is, they have to be brought together into one big land. So from the third point and the fourth point we can conclude that too much of ownership of land is bad and too less ownership of land is also bad. So people should have average ownership of land. Thus, the fourth point, consolidation of holdings, means small pieces of land are brought together, are readjusted and made into a land which is cultivable. Land consolidation is a planned readjustment of fragmented land parcels and their ownership. Land consolidation has made a good progress in Punjab, Haryana, Rajasthan, Madhya Pradesh, and Maharashtra. And the fifth feature of land reform is reorganization of agriculture. Techniques like cooperative farming were used for the reorganization of agriculture. In order to benefit the small farmers development agencies have been set up. So, was land reform successful in India? Land reform has made some progress in improving the agrarian system. However, not every part of the country saw the same pace of growth. This policy is actually under-implemented over the last 50 years. Though the zamindari system was abolished, other components of land reforms has not been satisfactory. Tenancy reforms also had many shortcomings. The provisions in laws to allow cultivators to become owners have neither been easy to understand nor easily implementable. So there are many causes of slow progress. The first is defective laws, the second is inadequate implementation, and the third is inadequate political support.